Okay, everyone, welcome to There Is a Solution meeting Saturday, 2 p.m. of Media Addicts Anonymous. Today's date is January 16th, 2021, and this meeting meets the first two Saturdays of the month. And I will press start on the recording now.
The recording has started.
My name is Cindy, and I'm a recovered media addict of the hopeless variety, and I will be leading this meeting and introducing our speaker today. So that you can absorb the important message we have to offer, please turn off all unnecessary media and focus on this meeting alone. This meeting is being recorded. If you'd like to listen to the recording, it will be listed on our website, which is www.mediaaddictsanonymous.org. Again, that is www.mediaaddictsanonymous.org. I'll begin with the set-aside prayer. Dear Higher Power, please help us set aside everything we think we know about ourselves, our problems, and our addictions, and about you. We ask that we may have an open mind and an open heart so that we might have a new experience with these things. Help us to see the truth so that we might learn to live our lives on a spiritual basis and be restored to sanity. Amen. This reading is taken directly from the Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous. When reading, so that we can better relate this passage wherever it mentions terms related to alcohol, I will substitute or add media addiction concepts where appropriate. To make the Big Book readings more inclusive, I will also change the pronouns from third person singular to third person plural. There is a solution. We of Media Addicts Anonymous are average people from all parts of the world. Many occupations are represented here, as well as many political, economic, social, and religious backgrounds. We are people who normally would not mix, but there exists amongst us a fellowship, a friendliness, and an understanding which is indescribably wonderful. We are like the passengers of a great liner, the moment after rescue from shipwreck, when camaraderie, joyousness, and democracy pervade. The feeling of having shared in a common peril is one element in the powerful cement which binds us, but that in itself would never have held us together as we are joined now. The tremendous fact for every one of us is that we have discovered a common solution. We have a way out on which we absolutely agree and upon which we can join in love and harmonious action. This is the great news that this book carries to those who suffer from media addiction. If you're seriously media addicted, as we were, we believe there is no middle of the road solution. We were in a position where life was becoming impossible. And if we had passed into the region from which there was no return through human aid, we had but two alternatives. One was to go on to the bitter end, blotting out the consciousness of our intolerable condition as best we could, and the other to accept spiritual help. This we did because we honestly wanted to and were willing to make the effort. We hope no one will consider these self-revealing accounts in bad taste. Our hope is that many media addicts desperately in need will see these pages. And we believe that it is only by fully disclosing ourselves and our problems that they will be persuaded to say, yes, I am one of them too. I must have this thing. So thank you all for being here. We welcome you to our solution, for we have found a solution to the media problem that really works. And it is my greatest pleasure to introduce today our speaker, Jane. I met Jane many years ago, actually, in several other 12-step programs. And to be honest with you, she intimidated me at first because she really worked her programs hard and she was very committed. So when she called me up and she told me she was desperate to look at her media addiction, I was both amazed and relieved because I had been praying for someone else to work with. And also someone who was as dedicated as I was. So I was glad that she was as desperate as myself. My own recovery and the solution to media addiction would never, ever have happened if I had not had the support of Jane. She is one of the most honest, sincere, and hardworking people I know, and she's taught me so much. This journey with Jane has had some pretty tough times, some highs, and some pretty devastating lows as well. But she's never given up, and she's remained a trusted friend through thick and thin. Jane lives the principles of MAA, and she has shared some deep, very authentic parts of her life with me, as I have shared very deep, authentic parts of my life with her. We've cried together, we've laughed together, and we've continued to work together. She is one of the wisest people I know, and I am honored and thankful that my higher power brought her into my life. Jane is also one of the best speakers I know in 12-step programs, so we are in for a real treat today. She has dedicated most of her life to recovery, and her recovery has always inspired me. So join me, please, in welcoming Jane as our speaker. Jane, you can go ahead.
Thank you, Cindy. Thank you for that introduction. I can't believe it was about me. That was really beautiful. Thank you. You are a dear friend, and I am so grateful. I would not have the recovery I have today if it weren't for you and the hard work you've done. So good morning, everyone. My name's Jane. I'm a recovered, uncured media addict of the hopeless variety, and grateful to be here today, grateful to have a chance to share my story. Before we start, I want to just say a personal prayer that I'm asking God to enter my thoughts and my words, and that if I can't say anything that will help anyone today, at least I pray that I don't say anything that will hurt anyone. So what an opportunity to share my experience, strength, and hope. I have a friend in program, and he says, what we share is what it was like, what happened, and what it's like now. So when I think about what it was like, I have to look back at my entire lifetime, and I'm in my 60s, so that's a long time. So in reviewing it, I did get out the history I wrote. I wrote it on May 30th, 2020, and I have sectioned it into decades. And so I'm going to go through those decades so that you know what my addiction, my specific addiction was like, and hopefully you can identify with some of it. You know, that first 10 years of my life, I don't think we had a television. I can't remember a television before I was 6 years old. But after 6, it was like on all the time. That is all I can remember. And it was such a part of my family. That's what we did as a family unit. My mother was a school teacher. She went. She didn't work when I was before I got into school, but as soon as I went to kindergarten, she went back to work. And in fact, I had to go to kindergarten. They used to have kindergarten was only half a day. And so I went to one school in the morning, and then the kindergarten teacher walked me to another school in the afternoon where I went for a second session because my mother was working and she had no place to put me. So I got to go to kindergarten twice a day. And, you know, we would come home, I'd come home from school, my dad would come home from work, and as a family, we would watch TV. And I remember that as like comfort and safety and fun. I come from a very warm, loving, extremely dysfunctional family. And it was very hard for me to see that dysfunction until I got into recovery in my 30s. I just didn't see it. I thought we were, you know, the picture of happiness, of a happy family. And I got that picture from all the media we watched, all the shows. I'm not going to mention shows today, well, maybe a couple, but I'm going to try not to because I don't want to trigger anyone. But when this was in the TV shows were about family life. And they showed the model family, you know, the happy mother and father, He went off to work. She stayed home. She baked nice things, and all the kids loved each other, and they played together. And if they had a problem, the father would come along. He would come home from work, and he'd fix it. And it all happened within 30 minutes. And that's what I kept thinking my life was like. It was far from it, but the fantasy became more important to me than the reality. My father was actually a workaholic, and he worked 3 jobs almost my entire life. So he was rarely there. But when he did come home, he spent all of his time in front of the television. And, he had a good work ethic, but I see now that he was probably trying to be as far away from the family as he possibly could, because neither he nor my mother were prepared to have young children and to deal with them. I can see that now very clearly. They were just not prepared for that kind of a lifestyle. My father, I'm the youngest. I have an older brother, and I had an older sister, and that happened shortly after my father got home from the war. And I believe he was definitely suffering from PTSD, although they didn't call it that back then. And he would just go into fits of rage for no apparent reason to me, anyway. And so you had to be very careful around him, and you had to make sure you didn't say anything or do anything wrong. So television was the perfect solution. You could lie in front of it and watch it for hours and never say a word, and everything would be fine and stable and steady. The things that I remember from my childhood of watching TV is we used to get something called the TV Guide. It came in the mail every week, and it would show you what shows were on what stations at what times. And my claim to fame, back when I was a little girl, was that I would memorize it, so that anytime I was in a discussion with anyone and someone said something about a television show, I could say what day of the week it came on, what time it came on, and what station it was. Back then, there were only 3 stations. I mean, television wasn't around very long when I started watching, and they only had 3 major stations. So I knew all that, and I studied it and studied it, and I thought that made me special. I thought that was like a good thing to do. I wish I had been studying my homework as much as I studied that TV Guide. The other thing I remember from childhood is there was one show, it was called Gidget, and there was a young girl in it, and she was like my model of perfection. I wanted to grow up and be just like Gidget. And a friend of mine down the street got a color television set, and she watched the show the same night that I did, but I was at home watching it in black and white. And the next day together, when I saw her, she started telling me about what Gidget was wearing. And she said that she had on this green outfit. And I said, oh, no, it wasn't green, it was purple. And she said, no, it was green. And I said, no, I'm sorry, it was purple. And she said, but Jane, I have a color television set. I saw it, it was green. You have a black and white TV. You couldn't know what color it was. And I said, no, I'm sorry, you don't understand. It was purple. And I know that like I know that my name is Jane. And, that says a lot about my personality from the get-go. I would argue about anything. I'm sure I was right. It didn't matter if you had proof. What I thought in my mind, I believed to be reality. And that's what television did for me. I believed all of that was real. When I got into my teens, I had a girlfriend, and I would go to her house after school, and we would sit and watch TV together. And she had this room, honest to goodness, I don't think it was maybe 8 feet wide by 10 feet long. And on one side of the wall was a couch, and on the other side of the wall was the TV. And it must have only been maybe 5 feet wide, because we would sit there with our knees almost touching the TV. And I've never sat so close to a television in my life. And her father owned a grocery store. So she had a kitchen full of junk food. And we would go after school every day and sit and watch TV and eat junk food. And we did it day in and day out. And I thought this was pure joy. I couldn't have been happier. Now, my 2 favorite things, TV and food. I was just so psyched about it. I also got into watching soap operas with my mother when she would come home from school. She came home late because she would stay after and do some of her work there. And we would watch soap operas together. And it was heaven for me. I was so invested in what they were doing and how they lived their lives, and that's how I was going to live when I grow up. Every idea that I had about life came from television, and I believed every bit of it. Also in my teens, I must say, I got very interested in boys and in drugs and in booze. And so those three things did keep me somewhat from being vested in television. I started spending, my weekends were all consumed with that. But at night, when I came home, I always sat down in front of the television. Instead of doing any schoolwork, I never would do that. That never seemed important enough to me. It was more important that I see the latest show. I didn't go to college. My parents wanted me to go to college. They were going to pay for me to go to college, but I couldn't be bothered with applying to college. That seemed like too much work. You had to write an essay, and I thought, oh my God, I'm not doing that. And I didn't want it anyway. I just wanted to be with boys, drugs, and booze. And so I decided to leave home and get a job. And I moved from Western Massachusetts to Cape Cod and got in with some friends. And we started living together in what I would call a commune. We called it that because we wanted it to be, but really it was just a house with a lot of people living in it. And it was total insanity. We were all out of our minds on drugs, and it was, we couldn't afford a television. Nobody had any money. Hardly anybody was working. I did have a job, but, there wasn't enough to buy a television. And so instead we played cards obsessively. We had card games that we played in the morning when we woke up, and then different card games that we played in the afternoon when we were just hanging out, and then different card games in the evening when we had more friends over. And so I had that obsessive compulsive behavior going on forever that I can remember. And, this just was more of it, but it didn't involve the media because it wasn't available to me. I realized after 5 years of living that way that it wasn't sustainable for me, that I was never going to get any kind of a decent job if I didn't get some kind of education, and I wasn't gonna be able to get an education if I didn't stop doing drugs and didn't start studying. So I moved back to my parents' house and went back to school and got a degree and lived at home while I went to school and got a job and with my degree. And again, it was television every night. I realized today that I never had conversations with my parents. We just sat down and watched TV. That's how we communicated. We could talk about the shows. I remember it was in the 70s, and disco was big, and they had this show on where they danced to disco, and we would hang out and dance together. Like, this was like what we did as a family. So anyway, once I had a job, I began to be restless living at home. It seemed to be the life that I wanted at all. So I moved back to Cape Cod and got a well-established job and with my degree. And that's when my life got really colorful. By now, I was just reaching my 30s, and I was doing a lot of drugs and a lot of alcohol, and having trouble maintaining my day-to-day existence, even though I had a really good job and I was showing up for work every day. At that time, excuse me, they were just coming into my company with word processors, and I got very involved with them, did a lot of work on word processors, loved working on a word processor, just loved them, got very good at it, could teach other people how to use them. They sent me to a programming class so I could learn how to program. But all the time, I must say that while I did well at work and I got a lot of credit for the things I did at work, what had happened from the time I was 6 until the time I was in my early 30s was my prefrontal lobe was being destroyed every day through looking at a screen. And while I was a somewhat organized person, because that's what my degree was in, organization, I didn't know how to prioritize, and I couldn't plan. I couldn't make goals. I would get ideas, but I just could not make them come true. And that really showed up in that computer class. And I remember they sent me back, and I was to program, I was to program a purchase order into the machine and make it so other people could go to the computer and purchase things. And I spent a month, and I couldn't get the date to print, and that was the first thing that had to happen. I could not figure that out. So they took me off of that, thank goodness. But I was drinking every day, and I was drugging every day at work, and it was beginning to show, so I quit. I knew that it was only a matter of time before. So I got out, and I started my own word processing business, and I had a lot of clients, and I did very well with the help of drugs. I stayed up all night working. I worked 7 days a week. And finally, in my mid-30s, I got sober because it just wasn't happening for me. I was fortunate. My sister was already in recovery. I went to visit her. She lived out in California, and I got sober. And so that was my first introduction to 12-step programs. And from there, my life changed completely. I started going to meetings. I started working the steps. I got into a big book step study program in the Hyannis meetings, the women's group, and I worked the steps out of the big book. And within a month of finishing my 5th step, I fell in love. I joined OA, and my life really skyrocketed. And I thought I had everything I could ever dream of. But I want to say that after I had fallen in love and we actually got married, we were spending all of our time, again, not communicating. We were sitting in front of a TV screen. We had a VCR. We'd meet each other at the VCR store, pick out films, bring them home, watch them over again, watch them. We started buying them. We started reruns of the same thing, but we loved them, and we couldn't be happier, lying on the couch watching our movies. We did argue about money in a major way, and I realized that I had to do something about it, and I was lucky enough to get into DA and start taking care of my money issues. But at the same time that I was getting into DA, Netflix started up, and I got into watching series, and I couldn't stop. I got my first smartphone, and I was playing video games all the time. I was playing them at home. After we'd watch a movie, I'd go to bed. My husband would stay up to watch something else, but I'd be like, oh, no, I have to go to sleep. But instead, I would go into the bedroom, and I would put on a game, and I would start playing it until he came in, and then I would try to hide it so he couldn't see it. My job was beginning to suffer. I was at work all day. What I would do was I would play games all day at work, solitaire on the computer or my own smartphone. I had other games that I liked better, and I would not do any of my work. And then when 5 o'clock came around, I'd feel so guilty. I'd stay late. I'd stay till 8 o'clock at night trying to get some work done so they wouldn't notice. But what they thought was that I was just working really hard. And, I was always there. I was always there late. And they always gave me like a lot of, approval for that because I was such a hard worker. But the truth was I wasn't working at all. And I was just trying to make up as fast as I could. With the help of DA, we were able to move into a dream home. It was a brand new place, and it was what I always wanted. We moved in there. We didn't have a TV, and I used to tell people, oh, we don't watch TV. Yeah, we didn't watch TV. We bought a computer with a 27-inch screen, and we streamed everything. It was like I was just lying to myself. I also joined Workaholics Anonymous because I couldn't deal with my work schedule, but unfortunately I didn't stay there long enough to get any real help. But I knew that 12 steps were the answer for me. That's what I knew. So in my 60s, finally now, I've been able to retire. And I had joined Al-Anon in my early 60s. We have several children, grandchildren with addiction diseases, and I was not dealing with it well. I wanted to stop it. I wanted to make them stop. And I was trying to do everything, and all it was doing was ruining our relationship. So I got into Al-Anon, and that was really helpful. And we decided, once I retired, my husband had already been retired for a few years, we decided to move out to New Mexico from Massachusetts and be further away from the family so we weren't so on top of what they were doing, and I wasn't being so critical and trying to get them to change and telling them what they should do. And, I thought because I had 12 steps, I had the answers, and it is the answer for me, but I know today it's not the answer for anybody else but me. People have to decide that for themselves. So it was good to get the distance. And I thought moving out here would be the answer to my dreams. And what did I find myself doing? Lying on the couch all day, watching TV, watching the computer, watching these series. So I needed help, and I knew that. I just didn't know what that help was going to be. Out of the blue, I got a phone call from Cindy one day, and I honestly don't even remember what we talked about. I don't know why she called, and I don't know what we said. But I do know that once I hung up, I had her phone I had her number in my phone. And, I had been to meetings, and I had heard her talk about her problem with media addiction. And this had been many years before. And I thought when she said it, oh my God, I need to look at that. But I didn't want to. And fortunately, the one in-person meeting she started, I think it was in Cambridge, somewhere in Boston, on a Friday night at like 6 o'clock. And I worked in Woods Hole, which is, miles from Boston, 60 miles from where the meeting was. And I got out at 5, and there was no way I was going to get to that meeting at 6 o'clock. And so I told myself, I would have gone if I could have, but it's too far away and I can't get there in time. And, it was just an excuse because I didn't really want to look at it. But now I'm retired. I can't get off the couch to do anything in retirement. And I have Cindy's number in my phone. And so one thing led to another. And I want to tell you what happened. This is how it had been. But what happened was I was working the 12 steps. And when I realized that I was in trouble, that's where I went. I went to Cindy for help with the 12 steps. And while we were here in New Mexico, and I couldn't make that call, we had to go back to Massachusetts. We were given a job back east for the fall season as pictorial artists at an amusement park. And we went back there, and my husband expected me to work every day, and I still was, I would get ready to go to work, but then I would turn on the computer and I would start watching. I was watching West Wing, and I couldn't stop. And I would just watch it until he'd come back home after he'd worked and said, "Are you coming? Are you coming?" And I'd be like, "Okay," but I was resentful. I was angry. I would work a couple of hours, and I would run back home to watch another show over lunch, and I was just not getting anything done. And I called Cindy, and I said, "Cindy, I need your help." And she sent me to the Back to Basics meeting that UA had in the morning. It was 7 days, and I went every day, and I listened to what they said, and it was like, okay, I'm going to try this. She had me writing every day all about my media usage. I was writing. I was listening to the Back to Basics. I was doing whatever I could. I think by then the Sunday meeting had started there. I was living for it. I couldn't wait to get to it. It was like the highlight of my week. And I was willing for the moment, for the day, for the minute, not to watch another episode of West Wing, even though I still had a good 40 more to see. And I kept thinking, when this is over with Cindy, I'll watch those other 40 episodes. I can wait. You know, it'll be okay. I'll get to do it eventually. I just have to wait and be more patient. But that's not what happened. She started these back to basic meetings for media addicts, and I started going to those. I couldn't wait to get to them. Like I said, I wrote out my history on May 30th of 2020, and I started that June 1st with the Back to Basics, and I've continued with them every day until now. This is 7 months later. And I really have no desire to watch anything. Any moving picture, I have really no desire to see. And that's been lifted, and it's really the grace of God. Because with my history, you know, there couldn't be enough moving pictures for me to watch. And, you know, now that I don't have that desire anymore, I have a very strong commitment, a very strong desire to be committed to doing service to this program, to people who are media addicts like I was, to helping them out of this hellhole. I know I see it in my children, I see it in my grandchildren, I see it in my great-grandchildren. You know, they are addicted to those screens. You know, they can't go anywhere without a phone. I remember when I was addicted to cigarettes, I couldn't leave the house without a pack of cigarettes and my lighter in my pocket. And I would get anxious if I were out and didn't have them. And it was like, oh my God, I have to go home. There's something wrong. And I see people that way with their phones. And I'm grateful today that I don't have to be that way. You know, it doesn't call to me, but I want people that are addicted like I was to be able to have a place to go and a solution. And, you know, that solution is not, you know, holding our breaths as long as we can until we get to watch media again. You know, that will never work. It's like, you know, trying to stop from drowning. You're going to hold your breath as long as you can until you can't hold it any longer. And that's what would be happening to me if that's what all I was trying to do was stop watching media. But I'm not. I'm working my butt off with these steps because our answer is a spiritual one. And today's session, our time together here, my talk was to be about step 2. You know, that we, I have to look it up. I'm sorry, I get this when I talk in a group, and so I want to read it correctly. Okay, we came to believe that a power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity. You know, I believe that happened the day I came to my first AA meeting in 1986. But I believe it continues to happen every single day of my life. I believe that's what brought me into OA, coming to believe in a power greater than myself that could restore me to sanity, that I had to do something about my food. I believe it's that same higher power that drew me to DA, where I had to do something about my money because it wasn't working. And my higher power wants the best life possible for me. It's the same higher power that got me to CLA, Clutterers Anonymous, because I had so much stuff I didn't know what to do with it all, and I didn't know where to put it. And he helped me let go of all of that and to trust and rely on him instead for my material well-being. I didn't have to rely on me at all. He got me into Workaholics Anonymous because he knew it was a problem for me. Unfortunately, I was the one who balked. I know he brought me to Al-Anon so that my relationships can change with my family, and they certainly have, in ways that I never could have imagined. And, you know, now he's brought me to Media Addicts Anonymous. And like I said, I just don't have the desire. But that's because the solution comes from working the steps. And for me, it never would have happened if I hadn't originally gone to a Big Book Step Study meeting and if I weren't working the Back to Basics now. Says here in step 2. So step 2 in the Big Book is in 2 chapters, actually. The first one, it's funny because it's not in the order that I would have written it, but thank goodness I wasn't the one writing this book, or we'd all still be in the big trouble. But the first chapter that deals with came to believe in a power greater than ourselves is chapter 4, We Agnostics. And it says quite clearly here, you may be suffering from an illness which only a spiritual experience will conquer. And I believe MIDI addiction is an illness that can only be conquered by a spiritual experience. But they say, the book says, to be doomed to a media addict's death or to live on a spiritual basis are not always easy alternatives to face. I mean, we're fighting not just our own desires, but we're fighting the desires of an entire society that lives through media. It is everywhere. It is forming every idea we have in our brain because we're always at it. It's always, they can't say it loud enough or long enough. It's always there in our face. And, to choose a spiritual life, are you kidding? Like, why would I do that? But fortunately, with my experience with 12 steps, that I found is the easier, softer way. It brings you into a life that you just can't even imagine. It's so good. However, lack of power was our dilemma, right? We had to find a power by which we could live, and it had to be a power greater than ourselves. Obviously, but where and how are we to find this power? Well, that's exactly what this book is about. I had been a church member as a little girl. My mother is the daughter of a Methodist minister, and so she was raised in a church, and she expected to raise her children in the church, and we did. We were raised that way, but I never understood it. I never got it. The highlight for me of every Sunday when we went to church was my father's aunt would come and she would bring lifesavers. And all through the service, she would hand me lifesavers. And I couldn't wait to get there and have lifesavers. I spent my whole time sitting there counting the stained glass windows, all the different colors. I counted the pews, I counted the candles, I counted the flowers. I just counted because I didn't understand what they were talking about. I really didn't get it. But when I came into recovery, lack of power, that's my dilemma. And I don't have any power. I tried everything I could think of to stop watching media. Getting rid of the TV, leaving the phone at home when I went to work, and anything that I tried was unsuccessful. Anything that I tried at all was unsuccessful. So I didn't have the power to change it. It had to be a power greater than myself. Fortunately, what the Big Book offers us, which I think is the key to everyone's recovery, is that we discover that we did not need to consider another's conception of God. Our only conception, however inadequate, was sufficient to make the approach and to affect a contact with Him. We found that God does not make too hard terms with those who seek Him. My sister told me when I first went to an AA meeting with her, and I came home and I said, you really believe in God? I don't get it, And I said, what is God to you? Explain it to me. And so she told me what her higher power was, and then she said, but Jane, you get to make up your own. And if what you make up isn't working for you, if it's not getting you, giving you everything you need and everything you want, then make it bigger. You can do that. And I was like, really? Like, I don't even have the imagination to make God big enough. And yet, little by little, they asked me in this book, am I even willing to believe? I am willing to believe. And today, that belief keeps me from doing any damage to myself and from a lot of damage to other people. And it's given me a life that is so amazingly wonderful that why wouldn't I want this God or something better? It's there for the taking, and it's free. Yes, it does say, we agnostics and atheists, which I believe I was an agnostic, chose to believe that our human intelligence was the last word. And I was so focused on being intelligent that I had nothing in my heart, and I couldn't see it. I needed to have a higher power that came into my heart. and helped me with my feelings. My head was all messed up from trying to do it right and not being able to, and trying to be perfect and not being able to, and thinking I knew the way and not knowing the way. It says here, in the face of collapse and despair, in the face of the total failure of their human resources, they found that a new power, peace, happiness, and sense of direction flowed into them. And they show how the change came over them when many hundreds of people are able to say that the consciousness of the presence of God is today the most important fact of their lives. They present a powerful reason why one should have faith. And that's me today. I have that consciousness. The presence of God is the most important fact of my life. And I meet other people who don't have a God in their life, and I don't honestly know how they can make it. I don't. And I had to abandon a lot of ideas that I had that were, like, why did small children die? And, why is there war? And why are we going through the catastrophes we are today with our government, with the pandemic, all of that. But it says in here, when we became addicts, media addicts, crushed by a self-imposed crisis we could not postpone or evade, we had to fearlessly face the proposition that either God is everything or else he is nothing. God either is or he isn't. What was our choice to be? It's a choice we make. I can defend my thinking that says, God's not here, God's not going to take care of me, God isn't enough, why are these things happening? I can defend that with lofty and windy arguments till the cows come home. And yet, I have to either believe or not believe. And my experience is believing has made my life so much better than it was when I didn't believe, that it's worth that choice. And at the end of the agnostics, it says very clearly, in very simple words, God had restored his sanity. I do know that God has restored my sanity, and I will be forever grateful for that. The part that tells us about what our insanity is like, and for some people that's a hard word. We don't want to think we're that bad. Insanity is what you call somebody who's really gone over the edge. Well, there are parts of me that are fine and perfectly normal and quite like other people. But I have parts of me, like the way I watch media and can't stop and believe it to be true and, focus my whole life and well-being around it. It is totally insane. And so that's in chapter 2 of our big book. There is a solution. And that chapter talks about, what has become of the common sense and willpower that he, she, it, whatever, still sometimes displays with respect to other matters. What had happened to my common sense and willpower? Because I had it to do certain things. I showed up at work every day. I had some sense about who I was and what was the right thing to do, but I couldn't carry through on it. And every little distraction just took me down another rabbit hole. And, there's nothing like a computer for distraction. It has so many opportunities, and I couldn't keep away from it. It says here, we are equally positive that once someone takes any media, whatever, into their system, something happens, both in the bodily and mentally sense, which makes it virtually impossible for that person to stop. And that was me. It was virtually impossible for me to stop. Therefore, the main problem of the media addict centers in the addict's mind rather than in the addict's body. So I have this, allergy, and Cindy talked about it last week when she spoke. I have this allergy, this physical allergy, when I start watching movie pictures that draws me into a screen that I can't get out of. I can't get away from it. I listened to a child psychologist talking about children watching video games. And they've measured, what's going on in their brain while they're doing this. And the amount of dopamine that is going into their brain by looking at this game and playing it is the same amount of dopamine that an addict, a cocaine addict, gets when they take a hit. And I was a big-time cocaine user. And so I'm looking for that dopamine everywhere I can get it. And nowhere do I get it as much as I get when I'm looking at media. But even if I have that, even if I know that, even if I stay away from it, my mind will tell me on any given day, the insanity of my mind, wait a minute, I can probably watch something. The fact is that for most media addicts, for reasons yet obscure, they have lost power of choice in whether they watch media. Our so-called willpower becomes practically non-existent. We are unable at certain times to bring into our consciousness with sufficient force the memory of the suffering and humiliation of even a week or a month ago. We are without defense against the first click. And, the almost certain consequences that following taking even one click do not crowd into the mind to deter us. I can think I can watch something briefly and I'll never watch it again. And that's just never been true in my whole history of life. It's never been true. So there is a solution for us. That's what the steps are about. It says almost none of us like the self-searching, the leveling of our pride, the confession of our shortcomings, which the process requires for its successful consummation. But we saw that it had really worked in others, and we had come to believe in the hopelessness and futility of life as we had been living it. If you're here today listening to this and you see the hopeless and futility of your life, this is a chance to change that. Goes on to say, when therefore we were approached by those in whom the problem had been solved, there was nothing left for us to do but to pick up the simple kit of spiritual tools laid at our feet. We have found much of heaven, and we have been rocketed into a fourth dimension of existence of which we had not even dreamed. Nowhere in any of the movies that I saw or any of the TV shows that I saw did they ever show anything like what comes from recovery. So I couldn't even imagine it. My relationships were all based on, a mother and father and, 2.3 kids or whatever, that was this perfect family, and that's what was supposed to happen to me. Let me tell you, when I started dating in my teens, that was anything but what was happening. And I didn't know how to deal with it. I only imagined what it was going to be like, and it wasn't like that at all, and I didn't know how to make it any different. I didn't get married until I was 44 years old. I had hopeless relationships. They were a mess. And I met a man in AA. And our whole relationship has been based on our belief and love in a higher power. And as a result, we have been able to get along in ways I never dreamed possible. I never saw it in my family. I never saw it on TV. And we have a rock-solid relationship today. And he loves me for who I am, not for something that I imagined to be, not for something that I saw on TV that was perfect. He knows all of my faults. He knows all of my shortcomings, and he loves me anyway. And I try to do the same thing for him. He's a lot better at it than I am. But I really try to do the same thing because that's what it's about. That's what real love is about. I had only the love from a TV show, and it's just not there. The central fact of our lives, back to the big book, the central fact of our lives today is the absolute certainty that our Creator has entered into our hearts and lives in a way which is indeed miraculous. God has commenced to accomplish those things for us, which we could never do by ourselves. And it brings me to tears. It really does, because that's what's happened. And I know you're sitting there thinking, yeah, well, maybe it happened to you, but it's not going to happen to me. But honestly, I was a hopeless media addict. I was a hopeless drunk. There was nothing that was going to work in my life ever until I found the 12 steps. And I think we have to do them. We have to keep doing them. I've seen people who have stopped doing them, and their lives get brittle and stale. And they don't grow. And, my life just keeps getting better and better and better. we were in a position where life was becoming impossible, and if we had passed into the region from which there is no return through human aid, we had but two alternatives. One was to go to the bitter end, blotting out the consciousness of our intolerable situation as best we could. And let me tell you, I tried to do that. That's why in my 60s, I'm watching West Wing until the middle of the night. And I've talked about this with other people in this program. I'd fall asleep because I was exhausted, but I couldn't miss anything. So I'd have to rewind and go back and start watching it again in the middle of the night. And I would watch and I would fall asleep at the same point. And I would go back. I would do this 5 or 6 times. And pretty soon it would be 4:30, 5 o'clock in the morning. I'd hear birds singing. And I'd think, oh my God, I've got to stop. And I would. But it took that for me to give up. And I would wake up, at 11 o'clock in the morning, feeling hungover. I know what a hangover feels like. Same thing for media. I would feel totally hungover, and I would promise myself, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to go to bed at a reasonable hour. I'm not going to watch that show today. I'm going to go out for a walk. I'm going to take a bath. I had all these things I was going to do. I never did any of them. The next thing you knew, I'd sit down, turn on one. I'll watch one show. I'll watch the beginning and see what this episode is about. And it didn't stop until the next morning at 4:30, 5 o'clock. So back to the book where it says one must go to the bitter end, which we know, and the other is to accept spiritual help. And that's what we get here. And we need it. We need each other. We can't do it alone. They can go anywhere on this earth where other free people may go without disaster, provided they remain willing to maintain a certain simple attitude. And that's my certain simple attitude, that there is a God and that the steps can heal us. And with that, I have been able to go anywhere on this earth. I've had a vital spiritual experience. They say here, the vital spiritual experience occurrences are phenomena. They appear to be in the nature of huge emotional displacements and rearrangements. Ideas, emotions, and attitudes which were once the guiding forces of the lives of these people are suddenly cast to one side, and a completely new set of conceptions and motives begins to dominate them. The ideas and emotions and attitudes that were the guiding force of my life, all of my life, have been what I've seen on television and movies. I rarely listen to other people talk, but even podcasts I'll listen to and I'll believe everything they say. That's it. That's the answer. I'm going to do this. I've tried every self-help possible. But without a spiritual underpinning for that, that's the guiding force that can rearrange our thinking, our insane thinking, this emotional displacement. I was the most emotional person I'd ever met. And today, with the help of this program, I still have feelings and I can talk about them with people, but I'm not inappropriate with them. I don't have to cry on everybody's shoulder. I don't have to feel sorry for myself all day. I can get on my knees. I can say, God, help me here. I'm suffering. It hurts. What do I do? And I'm always guided. Make a phone call. Get up and wash the dishes. Do something. And it passes. Any hardship I bring on is all of my own making. It's all of my own thinking. The final sentence here in there, the chapter 2 there is the solution, says, we believe that it is only by fully disclosing ourselves and our problems that others who read this will be persuaded to say, yes, I'm one of them too. I must have this thing. That's why I've spoken today. I want to fully disclose myself to you and my problem with media addiction, so that maybe you too will be persuaded to say, yes, I am a media addict of the hopeless variety, and I must have this thing. And I think that's all I have to say. Thank you for listening. Thank you, God, for helping me.